the Perek begins of Zelu Mazeh, Rosh V'Tevlu L'Masadik V'Rali. What does Zelu Mazeh mean? This in corresponding to this. Now this is.
Did you put your thing on?
Yeah. So we noticed in Perek Yud was a whole chapter which was completely devoted to the two levels of the Tzaddik V'Tovlo and the Tzaddik V'Rali. So V'Zelu Mazeh, this corresponding to this, because this whole chapter in 11 is dealing with the Rasha, conversely, the Rasha V'Tovlo and the Rasha V'Ralo. The Rasha, which has, again, as we'll explain what the Tovlo is, basically we had it in the first chapter already, but Dr. Rebbe is going to elaborate over here, just like he elaborates in the 11th chapter the difference between the Tzaddik and V'Ralei, the Tzaddik V'Tovlo and the Tzaddik V'Ralei. So too we'll have over here the Rasha V'Tovlo, L'Umas Tzaddik V'Ralei, corresponding, which means in contrast to the Tzaddik V'Ralei. So how do we explain the Tzaddik V'Tovlo, V'Ralei? That he has a bit of Ra, but it's it's completely surrendered to the overwhelming Tzaddikness, the overwhelming good and righteousness this person has. When you deal with Tzaddik Rasha V'Tovlo, he's primarily, overwhelmingly a Rasha, but he has a little Toiv, a little good, but it's so minimal that it's also surrendered to the overall Rasha, which he is. And that's how Rabbi elaborates and explains how Toiv Shebenafshali is the good which exists within his godly soul, Shebenmeiche, which is in his mind, in his intellect. As we remember, we said that is the primary station of the godly soul, as we elaborated on this in the beginning of chapter 9, where Al Rebbe tells us where is the animal situation, where is the situation, the animal soul situated, and where is the godly soul situated. So he says the godly soul primarily is memeiche in his brain, in his intellect, and in, as remember it said, Al Rebbe explains that it also has a station, as a branch, as a satellite station as well in the right side of the heart, as opposed to the Nefesh Bahamis, the animal soul, is stationed in the left side of the man's heart. So this type, in his intellect and in the right side of his heart, Kofel Batul is completely stands in submission, in subordination, in subjugation, Legabe Hara, and surrender, Legabe Hara, Mehaklipa Shebachala in the face of the evil of the Klipa, which is a negative force, Shebachala which is in the left dimension, in the left side, rather in the left side of the heart, where that is where the animal soul is situated. So the overall, what is common by this individual, what is in force, what is in gear, what is in mode, the entire, overwhelmingly, is the animal soul which exists in this, is situated in the left side of the heart. That is predominantly dominating the whole system. That's why he's called the Rasha, but he has a little bit Toiv. He didn't shun completely the good which exists within him. Which the good is, again, it says the good is Shebenefshali Kis. Where is the good of the godly soul? That in his brain, and in his intellect, and in the right side of the heart. There they exist, but it's so minimal that they stand in submission with Gabei, in front of the overwhelming Ra, the overwhelming evil, comes from the Klipa Shebachol Asmali of the left side. That's why he's called the Rasha. V'Tevlo. So Dr. Rebbe continues and says, just like we said by the Nefesh Elikis, by the godly soul, that this phenomenon is divided into tens of thousands of levels, as we explained the other day, that when you're dealing with a speck or a bit, we gave an example of coffee. You could have one little speck of coffee in this bottle, in this jug of water, 2 specks in the other jug of water. You could be in tens of thousands of differences, even though in the overall they belong to the same overall category, that it's overwhelmingly water and just a bit of coffee in each one, but it could be divided literally tens of thousands of different types of combinations of the water and the coffee. Overwhelmingly water and a bit of coffee. Again, 1 speck, 2 specks, 3, and so forth. You have tens of thousands. Similarly, when you're dealing with the Rasha V'Tevlo, how many levels of Rasha V'Tevlo there are? Because you're dealing with a situation that is overwhelmingly a Rasha, overwhelmingly Ra, just a bit of Tev, Ma'urav V'Seicha, and a bit of Tev rather, which is Kofel Batul, which is completely stands in submission to the overwhelming Ra, overwhelming Rashaness which exists by this individual. Hence, consequently, when we understand that it's also divided into tens of thousands of levels. How much? Quantitatively and qualitatively. How much is this stand, this taiv, this good? How much does it stand in submission to the rachas v'shalom, to the evil? There's somebody who has this, again, this kfifa v'abitul etzlei ma'at mizeir, which means that it is just a bit. The taiv is a bit nullified. In other words, the taiv is still evident. This is what the Rebbe says. The taiv is still evident. It's not completely, doesn't stand in complete submission to the ra, to the evil. What does it mean? You can still see the taiv is a little more obvious. It's evident. It's manifest in the lifestyle this person lives. Now, the Rebbe gives a few exampple. He gives three things over here. Interestingly, the Rebbe says this in three different examples. First thing is, he says that the first thing that Rebbe says, it's it's not something which is tmidiut, which means it's not something which comes frequently, and it doesn't come close in proximity of time. Rechaikim means it's spread out. The time where the evil takes over the good and brings the good into a state of complete submission to the evil, it's not something which happens frequently and close in time proximity, but leitim rechaikim, which means it's spread out. For example, we say in close proximity, chas v'shalom, someone should take the scenario, someone should sin 5 times in an hour. Chas v'chalila, chas chalila v'chas. So what's happening in the time, and again when a person sins, what happens is what comes to fruition is his ra. What is in practice is his evil. So the taiv which exists within him is overwhelmed now by the evil, because he's sitting. Which means when a person sins, it's a kind of dominance of the evil over a little of his good. We say that tzaddik doesn't sin at all, like we said, therefore what is common, what is prevalent is the taiv. But we're dealing now with the rasha. Let's say chas v'shalom he sits 5 times in an hour, as an example. Let's say 5 times a day. Let's not stretch it. Let's not pull it. 5 times in a day. Every time he sins, that little taiv which he has kind of dips under the ra. Because there's no such a thing a person could say, I'm sinning and I'm still my nefesh, my godly soul is still in practice. No. When a person is sinning, his godly soul is not only not in practice, it's completely submerged in the experience of the Yetzer Hara. The Rebbe will tell us later that it's not only submerged within the experience of the Yetzer Hara pulls the nefesh alikis, pulls the godly soul into its experience, and therefore it dirties the godly soul. It makes the godly soul tainted and dirty, and because it makes the godly soul tainted and dirty, therefore the nefesh alikis, that's the point of tshuva, that's the point of other types of cleansing the neshama, because the neshama, like one man said, like the famous saying that the person says, it's perfectly peaceful in my system, that when I sin with my animal soul, my Yetzer Hara. When I do good, I do my Yetzer Tov. It doesn't work that way. The Yetzer Tov is always invested in the Yetzer Hara. In other words, the Yetzer Hara does an aveda, it pulls the nefesh alikis in it. But here we're not dealing with this dimension of the experience of sin. One thing is clear: when a person sins, what is manifest and what is overtly the overt experience is the experience of the nefesh bahamis. The overt experience is the Yetzer Hara. He's sinning. Hashem says no, and he does it anyways. What happened to his taiv? Because it's an experience of the nefesh bahamis, of the Yetzer Hara, so the taiv is completely submerged into that experience. It doesn't have the ability to lift its head over. It's dipped into the experience. Because had it lifted its head and stood in protest, or it presented itself, its taiv, its energy of good, its energy of godliness, that would mean the person not really sinning. The fact that he allows himself, engages in the experience of sin, means to say what is totally overwhelming over here, or what is in complete function and mode, is the nefesh bahamis. The nefesh alikis right now had to dip into that experience. It could not express itself, because again, if it would express itself, the person would not sin. So the experience of sin itself says that the nefesh alikis is not in function now, not in mode. So if he does Rachmana litzlan 5 times a day, those 5 times the taiv, the good, which is still exists by the Rosh of V'Tevli. Remember, he's still a Rosh of V'Tevli. He has some obvious good. So the 5 times that he sins, that good loses its personality, or loses itself succumbs to the experience of the Yetzer Hara. So the Yetzer Hara is completely taking it over, and that's the loy dimension, like we said, Rosh of V'Teiv, loy. The taiv is loy. It's completely submerged in the experience of the Ra. The times between and the times when he doesn't sin, the taiv, the nefesh elikis, the godliness, the godly revelation or the godly experience of the nefesh elikis, which is the nefesh elikis, the taiv which exists, as he says, that's the energy of the nefesh elikis, is standing on guard to some degree. That's why he's not sinning in the times when he doesn't sin. So we'll take in 6 hours, let's say, or in a day, we said in a day 5 times. So from every time, why doesn't he sin 10 times in that day? Because in those between the 5 times that he sinned, the taiv is still standing there. He says, no, I am a godly soul and I do not want to taint and dirty myself, chas v'shalom, in the experience of sin. So the taiv is standing with his head up, his head out of the experience of the Ra, over the water. And it's saying, no, I'm not going to sin. But Rahman al-Islam, he's still a Rasha v'Tevla. He's still a Rasha. So after if you divide, let's say, 6 to have a good number, which means every 2 hours he sins. So the first 2 hours, his nefesh elikis stands with a certain strength and determination. No, I'm not going to sin. Unfortunately, 2 hours go by, he succumbs to this lust and temptation of sin. What happens when he succumbs to lust and temptation of sin? What happens at that time in experience? The nefesh elikis comes to the surface. The nefesh elikis is loy, right? The rasha v'tayv loy, that tayv which exists, loy means to say it's submerged, it's tucked under the experience of the nefesh elikis. Goes by another 2 hours. What happened in those 2 hours? Why didn't he sin in those 2 hours? Because the tayv was on the surface. The taiv was functioning. The nefesh elikis was functioning. I'm not going to sin. I'm not going to sin. I'm not going to. 2 hours he was unable to hold himself back. I'm not sinning. What happened 2 hours later? Again, in this example which we're giving, he sins 6 times a day. What happens 2 hours later? He succumbs to another taiv. What happens? He succumbs to another taiv. The rasha takes over, and the taiv is again submerged. The taiv has dipped into the experience of the sin. So this is what the Rebbe says. It's something which, I don't know how this would be classified, if tadir or not tadir, frequent or not frequent, but everything is relative. A person's a rasha that he sins 10 times a day. So in comparison to someone who sins 6 times a day, that is called not as frequent. 6 in comparison to 10, right? 10 in comparison to 20 is called not as frequent. So that's why the Alter Rebbe says it's tens of thousands of different levels of a rasha v'tevli. He's not a rasha v'ralai, because the Rosh of will see in the end of the day that he's b'chlal, he's not cognizant of his nefesh elikis at all, or his nefesh elikis never is in function, never stands with demonstration, expression or manifestation, or determination to say, yes, I have a godly neshama. That's the Rosh of This person does. And between the time he sins, he says, no, I'm not going to sin. And he's able to control himself not to sin. So the taiv is still there. It's not completely shunned and it's not completely torn away. It's still there, and it stands in function, and it functions, right? The time between one sin and another, but after a few hours, again, it could be once a week. It depends. You're dealing with tens of thousands of different levels, and this is all I've been saying. How much does it stand in submission to the overwhelming Ra? If he sins 5 times a day in comparison to someone who sins 5 times a month, his taiv is more loy, stands in submission to his Ra. Someone who sins 5 times in 1 hour, so his taiv is more in submission to the overwhelming Ra. Someone sins once a month. He's not. He is a sinner because at a certain time he had the ability to control himself in his thought, speech, and action, and he gave in to temptation, a certain temptation. So that taiv stood for a whole month with strength and determination, and it was in total expression. I'm a soul, and I'm a nefesh elikis, and I'm going to make sure that my nefesh elikis is going to be the dominant force in my whole reality, my whole system, in my ir k'tana, my small city, like the Alter Rebbe calls the body. After within a full month, it came Chav Test, and 29th day of the month, as an example, he succumbed to a certain taiv, succumbed to a certain sin. So the taiv there is also loy. It also stands in submission to the rashanis which exists within this person. But this is once a month. And the same thing you could say once a month, once in 2 months, or once a year. He's not. He's definitely still a rasha, because someone who even sins once is classified as a rasha. So between sinning once and twice and 3 times a year, or 4 times a year, and then once a month, or once in a week, or once in an hour, this is again tens of thousands of different levels. How much the Taiv stands in surrender, in subjugation to the overwhelming Ra, the overwhelming Russianness which exists with him. So that's what the Rebbe says. It could be Yesh Mishakfif a bit like Ma'at Mizer. First of all, it's a little bit. The little bit, which means it doesn't come to full swing expression. And the Rebbe says, to give an example, even in Halacha, you find an Aveda, which is classified as a Rabbanon dik Aveda, or a Deiraisa dik Aveda, or something which is not, he's going to explain as well, something which is not so is not such a potent sin, even though we know that we never weigh Avedas to say this is more Aveda, less Aveda, but there is classifications of sins. First he says, Ma'at Mize'er, which means firstly this person could be just a little bit. The Taiv is just a little bit stands in surrender, not fully surrendered. That's ready. When you say a little bit in this context, means he's a better person. The Taiv is still on the surface. It's only when it surrenders to the Ra, it's just a little surrender, not a full swing surrender. That's number one. It's not something which comes frequently. It's again, the proximity between one sin and another sin is not as close. Periodic or infrequent timing. Mizgaber harala teiv, the evil will strengthen itself on the good. The kevish ktana, and it captures the small city. What means a small city? It takes over. It then conquers the small city, which is again the body. But not the entire body. Just a bit of the experience of the body. She is subtle mashma'usay, that the Ra, the evil, takes over in a way that it should listen to its direction, to its directives, follow its direction of the nefesh b'am, and the body becomes a chariot and a garment that from the nefesh bahamis, the animal soul, the animalistic message, or the evil message of the Yetzer Hara, comes in to that particular garment or that particular part of the body, which that comes right then, that becomes a chariot to it, because it serves the purpose of the Yetzer Hara. You think about the notion of chariot or garment. A chariot is there to serve the purpose of the rider. The rider hops onto the chariot, and it gives a swing, and the chariot goes. So the chariot is serving the purpose of the rider. And the same thing, a garment will always go together with the person who's invested in the garment. If I'm wearing a jacket, I'm going to walk, the jacket's going to walk with me. So the jacket becomes something to which surrounds and becomes fitted to myself, to my hand, or to my foot, or to my whole self. The same thing. When the negative message of the animal soul comes in and decides to sin with one part of the person, maybe thought or speech and action, what happens then? The thought becomes a chariot. I'm just explaining the term. The Rebbe says, the thought becomes a chariot to this nefesh bahamis, to the message, the signal of the animal soul, of the Yetzer Hara. One of its garments, not all, which means here the Rebbe is telling us of a case. He goes on a certain extreme. It doesn't mean it's the farthest extreme, because it could be, when you're dealing with tens of thousands of different levels, how much the Taif stands in submission to the right, you could probably find something a little more to the right. But Al-Rebbe gives us a scenario over here that somebody who is not an outright rasha, a constant sinner, he's classified as a rasha, even he sins infrequently, because someone who is a Beinani, we're going to find out, never sins at all. It's not a tzaddik yet. We'll find out why he's not a tzaddik. Beinani never sins at all. So he's a rasha. He does sin. But the Rebbe shows us more of a lukewarm case, that he's not a fierceful rasha to sin frequently. Because again, you have over here sinning frequently. You have over here, when he sins something with a full, let's say, a deiraisa, which is not mat mizeh. It would be somebody who sins with an open Torah law, transgression. And then somebody, when he sins, he makes sure that he sins with all his 3 garments, with his speech, with his action, and with his thoughts. simultaneously. He gets involved in Aveda that is impure to thought, which means the thought became a Merkava chariot to the impure signal of the Nefesh Bahamis. And in the same Aveda, he had speech, negative speech, and in the same Aveda, he had negative action. So what he did was, this Rasha, he sins frequently. When he sins, he makes sure it's a Deiraisa, and then he makes sure that he purifies all three of his garments. That's to the left. It's also Rasha. A little bit of Taiv he has, because from the one time that he did time to the sins to the other, the Taiv comes out. Right? It dips its head, or sticks its head out of the experience of the sin and says, I'm not going to sin until the next time he sins, right? But he sins frequently. Here, Dr. Rebbe kind of gives a lukewarm scenario of a Rasha. That when he sins, he'd make sure it's not a Deiraisa. And when he would sin, he's still in control that it should not happen frequently. What it means to not happen frequently, between one time he's sinning and another time he says, the Taiv is obvious. That's number 2. Number 3 says when he sins, he makes sure only one of his 3 garments should be impure, not all 3. Or it's speech, or it's action, or it's thought, not all 3. So this is a Rasha he is, but it's kind of to the right, because it's not something which is overly involved and a fervent sinner. So but in the same token, the Taiv, the fact that he even sins ma'at mizeir, even on a drabonon, because it's against the Ratzon of Hashem, the Taiv at the time of his sin is still dipped under the experience of the Rasha, the Ra, the evil exists in him. Because after all, even if the Rabbanon is something which, again, if it's Nehepach Ratzon Hashem, it's contrary to what Hashem wants, it's prohibited to no. Or even something which comes once a month, Hashem says, don't even sin once a month. Right? And it comes once a month. So it's again a Rasha he is. So 29 days the Taiv stands above and proud and is in complete mode and function. But the 29th day of the month, as an example, it dips into the Ra experience. Hashem says no as well. And even if he's ready to spare the other 2 of his garments, they should remain pure and only sin with one of the garments, it's still called a Rasha, because Hashem says don't sin with any of your garments. But it's still, again, I'm just saying this, on the other hand, Alter Rebbe gives a scenario over here, and he's going to be articulate, that it's still a rush of a table that more to the right, that it's not a strong practicing Russia type of yid. How does Dr. Rebbe explain? Where Dr. Rebbe articulates these 3 ideas which the Alter Rebbe says over here, which are clearly distinct and compartmentalized. Ma'at mizeir, which means it's not a deiraisa, not frequent, and again he makes sure not to impurify all 3 of his garments simultaneously. The Hainu. Or an action. Here is again a scenario which plays out these 3. He does, first of all, action. He does an Aveda that his mind and his speech are not involved. So what did he purify? Only one of his garments. And when he does the action, he makes sure it's not a Deiraisa, Avedas Kalis, things which are classified according to Torah. Again, we're told, do not weigh the Kalis, Kivav Chamuris, do not weigh the Chamor, those which are lenient sins and stringent sins. But in the fact that we say don't weigh them means according to Torah that the phenomenon exists, right? Something's a davar kal or a davar chamor. Something is a karis, you see it by the consequence, by the punishment. Something is a capital punishment, it's a heavier sin. Something which is malchus is a lighter sin. Something which is not even malchus, the rabbanon, that would be avedas kalis. So there does exist avedas kalis. So again, we see over here ma'isa levad, he makes sure it doesn't impure all 3. But it's only action, and then he does Avedas Kalis, which is again light Avedas. He would not get involved in any Chamur and anything which is again stringent, severe according to Torah. Now the Alter Rebbe doesn't say over here frequent or infrequent, because we already told he doesn't do it frequently. We don't have to give an example, right? He doesn't do it frequently. Oi gives an example of a He makes sure that his mind stays pure, his action stays pure, but speech, he will purify speech. Ledaber Avak Lashon Hara, which is again not, this is Ma'at Mizair, this is the Dibur which is also Kal, not real Lashon Hara, but the dust of Lashon Hara. Alter Rebbe Rambam writes in Halacha, based on the Gemara, that there's something which is clear Lashon Hara, which is a Deiraisa, and then there's certain cases, you can look in Rambam, you can look in Shulchan Aruch, starting from even in the common Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, there's certain examples which are given. What does it mean, dust of Lashon Hara? Which means you don't say clearly that this person did that and that. You just say something would indicate that this person did that and that. So this person.
Can you give an example?
Don't talk to me about that person. As an example. Oh, don't talk to me. Why don't you want to talk to me about something? Something will come up. You don't say that this person did that and that. Because when you say this person did that and that, you fit the criteria of Lashon Hara, no one heard about it, you reveal it to others people, you are clearly transgressing a Deiraisa. But if you just say, okay, don't talk to me about this. So it arouses the curiosity of people, and they'll say they know what you know, but you didn't say it. That's called the dust of Lashon Hara. This person is careful. And because the taiv is still prevalent by this person, the taiv is still in function, and if she'll kiss no chas v'shalom, I wouldn't say Lashon Hara, but I'll to throw a word here and there, the dust of Lashon Hara, I'm okay. So what's happening when the person is saying that? He's not impurifying his thought. It's not too much thought he's giving. He's not doing anything in action. He's purifying his speech, and even with his speech, he's making sure shouldn't be a Issa Deiraisa, it should be a Aveda Kal. That's the Me'at Mizeh.
Or if the person says something and you roll your eyes. Something like
that's a similar idea. It's a similar idea. True, similar idea. Right, right. You've got to be careful also. Another thing, Velitzad, is a certain laughter, a certain looseness, Kahai Gavana, which does not lead usually to anything good. It has to be structured. It doesn't mean periodically. It even says Rabbi used to give a shir. He used to make a certain loose joke in order to get the attention of the Talmidim, in order they should be able to concentrate on the subsequent Limidat Torah. But Litzanis means a kind of a clear looseness, which is a laughter, looseness which doesn't bring to anything and is not structured, again, which is a basis, as we all know, to a person falling even into sin, any sin. But he's not chas v'shalom sinning. He's just abak lashon hara, but Litzan is a certain sense of laughter. So when he transgresses the Litzanis, like I say, structure in Yiddishkeit is so important. He lets loose in a way, again, which is not leading to anything structured. That's called Litzanis. So what he's doing over here is, it's a davar kal in comparison to speaking lashon hara or chas v'shalom, saying something which is in transgressing any other aveda, which is a deraisa, and he's doing it again. It's not a deraisa. He's doing only with one of his garments, which is a speech. That of Zalal Tereberai, it's a kahai gavna, or anything similar in speech, which is not a deraisa. Oi, Rebbe continues, or b'machshava levad, which is in thought. So Rebbe showed us that it's not all three, action, or speech, or he says, or in thought. Or in thought, he says, what's the example in thought? Which means he makes sure his actions are pure, his speech is pure, but he allows his thoughts to think things which Torah prohibits. As we know, that thought plays a very important role in our Yiddishkeit. And to the extent there's an expression of the Gemara, Hiruri Aveda Koshim Aveda. Thoughts of sin are worse than the sin itself from a certain perspective and point of view. I'm not going to go into the older, but obviously in halacha, the actual sin is the transgression, but ultimately the thoughts of sin, because it's closer to the nefesh, it's closer to the soul, as thought is a much closer garment to the soul, so it has from a certain perspective and point of view, it taints, it dirties the neshama, in a sense, even more than the action of the Aveda. But we're not going to go into the difference now. The Rebbe mentions it over here. That's what we're explaining this expression of the Gemara, but not to leave the context. What the Rebbe is trying to explain, oy b'machshava levad, means this is a person which makes sure that his speech is clean and his actions clean, but in mind he allows inappropriate thought, because again we know thought plays a very important role in our Yiddishkeit. Hashem says clearly in the Torah that man is not to entertain, we are prohibited to entertain our thoughts in things which clearly Torah says this which we're prohibited to think about, again, which brings entertainment to our thought. Hashem says, this individual, he allows, again, in his thought, he allows certain thoughts, inappropriate thoughts to come into his mind. Even though he doesn't think that he's going to chas v'shalom do this aveda, he's just thinking about it. Again, in other words, what Al Tereb is negating, he's not going to do, which means he's going to make sure that his actions are going to be clean. And it could be for the whole year. It could be even all his life. He's going to make sure his actions are clean, his speech are clear, but he allows his thought to invest in a thought which Hashem says not to think, not to deliberately think about. So again, he's impurifying one of his garments. Still, this is still the example, based on the example that it began. Where do we see it? What is, for example, being the relationship of male and female, anywhere in means in the world, not even particularly thinking about a particular case or scenario, etc. The whole concept. This is what Teda says. Teda says that Teda warns, that a person has to be careful. And the Gemara explains this pasuk, that a person has to be careful from everything which is evil. The Gemara says, a person has to make sure to make that entire day, in other words, when he has complete control in his mind, that he has to make sure that he keeps his mind pure, that he should not, chas v'shalom, deliberately think these things what Teda says to not think. So in this person, again, that's why he's a Rasha, that despite it comes infrequent, right? 29 days, 29 days of the month. He has his thought, his speech, his action, everything is pure. But the last day of the month, and again, we're not talking about the calendar, once a month, he gives into interpretation, his mind and the heart send a signal, think about that, and Teda says do not, and he deliberately accepts that thought. So he's a Rasha, he is, even though it comes infrequent, and even though it only purifies one of his levushim, one of his garments. So this is in the negative. This is the type of the Rasha. Then the negative, he makes sure in these three areas. Again, Mat Miseir, not a Deiraisa. Only, and again, infrequently. And the third thing is only one of his garments. That's in the Leisasa. And Dr. Rebbe says, flips over to the Mitzvah Say. So clearly, Dr. Rebbe builds up over here. The sense of organization in Tanya is amazing. Dr. Rebbe comes right now to the sequence, how the one thing comes, how everything is so organized. It's just amazing how the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya with such precision. Here, clearly, the Alter Rebbe stops over here with the Loisese, or the Alter Rebbe jumps to Mitzvah Say, because we know in Avodas Hashem, we're not only supposed to stay away from, not only to be careful not to stay away from things which are prohibited, we have to make sure to do everything that Hashem says. I'm not going to sin in any Loisese. Is going to come Pesach, I'm not going to eat mitzvah. That's a transgression. You didn't actively do the mitzvah. Or similarly, when you're dealing with putting on tefillin, or lighting candles, or shaking the lulav and esrog, or in here, if you notice over here, the Alter Rebbe is saying a certain mitzvah, which, as we mentioned, if you remember at the very beginning of the first chapter, we pointed out that at the end of the day, the hardest mitzvah to fulfill is the mitzvah of limud hatayra, of lasik b'tayra, because it's the only mitzvah that you can never say you did it. It's like the famous halacha, which says why, when it comes to benching, there's the bracha before benching and the bracha after benching. When it comes to limud hatayra, we make a bracha before. Why don't we make an after bracha for after limud hatayra? Because the answer is we make a bracha before. And after that, we don't make a bracha. Why don't we make a bracha after? Because there is no after learning. There's no such thing I learned and that I'm done. A person's working, so you have other things to do, therefore you're exempt from learning Torah. But if you have the ability to learn, we're obligated to learn Torah. So it's, again, interestingly, the Alter Rebbe, when he speaks about the active mitzvah, which this Rosh Hashanah is not adequately careful, he doesn't say putting on tefillin, because this is a type of person who puts on tefillin every day. He doesn't say about the lulav and esrog, because he shakes the lulav and esrog every yontif and every day of the yontif. So, and he makes sure to eat shmur matzah, makes the. But when it comes to this difficult mitzvah of limud hatayra, he will learn, but he doesn't utilize the opportunities which are given to him to occupy himself in Torah the way he's supposed to. And that's why he's a Rosh still. Remember, he's a Frume Yid. That's what Alter Rebbe, this example, this type of Rosh that Alter Rebbe is describing over here, is that very much to the right, that lukewarm Rosh. As we said before in the Leisesa, not to repeat again these details, Alter Rebbe says the idea that it's not, he doesn't throw himself completely into the mode of sin. Make sure it's a drabanan, infrequent, also only one of his garments. But in the positive side, he gives an example: shas hakeisha lasik b'teira. It's an opportune time to learn teira. And finally, bilavatala, and he deliberately allows his heart to go astray with things which are in vain, things which are trivial. Obviously, we learn Pirkei Avos, Haneir Balayla, someone's up at night, which a night is a very conducive time to learn Torah. And he's up at night, and finally, Bilavatala, his heart, which again could utilize the time, the special time which is given to the person to learn Torah, and finally, Bilavatala, Let his heart go straight. So again, you're dealing with a very frumy yid, but such a mitzvah limitated. Instead of doing it completely, he lacks in his devotion to this mitzvah, which is again a mitzvah which is incumbent upon every yid to utilize every moment to learn Torah. So it's an opportune time. It has to be an opportune time, obviously, not someone's brushing their teeth. Obviously, it's not the time. It's not a time that he could learn. Maybe if he wants to think Torah is one thing. If it's in a place he could think Torah. You're talking about when the setup is just right, and everybody knows in their life, this is a good time that I could take a sefer and learn. And I dafka make a decision, no, I'm not going to learn. It's a clear, overt transgression. So again, here, by this is the example that the Rabbi gives. And again, interestingly, that he chose this example, doesn't choose an example that he didn't put on tefillin. Because remember, we're talking about a Rosh Hashanah, which is completely to the right, as an example. So the Rebbe says he does everything right, but it's a time, an opportune time to learn Torah, and he doesn't learn Torah, and finally he lets his heart go to things which are to go stray and things which are trivial, to catch the attention or to occupy himself, things which are trivial. We'll finish up over here, but just let's finish the in any of the above mentioned cases is called Mikrosh Beisahi. At that time when he's sinning, he's called a Rosh Hashanah. Why? Because the evil which exists within the nefesh strengthens itself and mislabish beguf, means to say it is which is in function. This is in the mode. This is in function. When the person sins, the evil within his nefesh is functioning. Mislavish begufein invests in his body, and it makes him sin and impurifies him. But because he's still a Rosh Hashanah, the Teiv is still in power. The Teiv is still in function. To the extent, especially we're talking about this type of Russia, that from time to time, from the fact that it's only once infrequent, you say infrequent, it's been the last time to this time he sinned, he is on duty and on guard not to sin. Because his taiv is strengthened itself after Rahman al he falls into that sin. Goiber by a taiv. Taiv gathers strength, galvanizes all the strength. It strengthens Benafshir, Halikis, which is godly soul. And not only it's not going to sin, but it feels also mischaret. He asks, it regrets the fact that it gave in to the temptation of the Nefesh Bahamas, and he asks forgiveness from Hashem. He asks atonement from Hashem, and Hashem Yislach Le. Hashem will definitely forgive him. Im Shav B'Tshuva Arui Al Pi Yatzas Chachamenu Zal and Hashem will forgive him if he does the appropriate tshuva. Doesn't play it like a game. We look into the suggestions of our sages of blessed memory. So there was a famous Rabbi Shmuel, which he writes clearly different types of kapara, different types of experience of atonement, which is based on different levels of sin. And we, like it's explained, it's in the Talmud. The Alter Rebbe brings it in the first page, in the first chapter of Ageres HaTshuva. He explains again that it's mitzvah, mitzvah, and so on. So if this person will do tshuva, Hashem will definitely forgive him. But again, here we're not talking about the mitzvah of tshuva. The Alter Rebbe will say yes, he will regret, he will ask forgiveness from Hashem. Hashem will definitely forgive him if he does the right tshuva. But here we're classifying this person that the overall his taiv is still in function, is still manifest, and still potent. That the fact that he's able to hold himself back from one time to another, and again, even when he does sin, his taiv is still in function, that it wouldn't allow him to sin a deraisa. His taiv is still in function, and when he falls prey to his yitzhara, it'll be only one levush, one garment. And the same thing in the mitzvah say, he'll be a perfect yid in the mitzvah still in all these things, which all the other mitzvahs. When it comes to the Torah, which is more of a difficult mitzvah, he'll fall through, which means he won't keep it the way he's supposed to keep the mitzvah of Torah. So the taiv is there, but it would fall. But from the time, and it's also not always, he will sit and learn and make sure that every shir he comes on time. That one time he fell through, but the taiv, he can't say the taiv is not there. The taiv is very strongly there. It's potently there, and its function is very potent. The nefesh elikis by this person is very potent, and very obvious, and very much in function. Because after all, you're dealing with this rasha that he's not chas v'sholom for a sinner. Okay, have a good night.
Thank you so much.